Okay, well, welcome back to Room Tone, the podcast. No, it's Why We Roll. It's the TTRPG game design podcast of the Stillfleet Studio with myself, Wythe Marschall, and Chris
Oh,
Pickett.
me. Hey, yeah, me. Hey, what's up? What's up, everybody? I'm Chris Pickett. Good to be back. Thanks for joining us once again.
That's Chris Pickett. And this is the only show you can talk about tabletop role playing games on. It's the only one. No, of course not, but we do
Is
like
that a
talking
that's like
about it.
a trend in podcasts right
That
now?
is, yeah.
Like I've been listening to a lot of podcasts that open with that. Is that a thing? Are we on the button right now? Are we
It,
cool?
Or we might be on the bubble, which is a bad thing
Ooh, no.
in betting sports.
I hate
Today
bubbles.
we're very excited though with someone who's definitely on the pulse, maybe a different
Yeah,
metaphor.
on the pulse. Yes.
Um, Josh Domanski. So hey Josh, what's up? Thanks for making time.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, of course. We are excited to talk to you. We were connected through Zach Cox at Soul Muppet, so shout out to Zach in regard to Orbital Blues Month. So this is, I should say, before we talk about many other things, one of our special mini series, our first actual series, really properly planned out on
Sure.
Orbital Blues. So we are going to talk about other games. We're really curious about your work overall, but we're here to celebrate and let people know about Orbital Blues Month, which is coming right up. It hasn't started quite yet, but starts very soon. And Josh, you have one of the projects. There are a bunch of cool projects, a bunch of creators whose work we admire, and in general, we like sort of innovative science fiction and games that play with genre. So Orbital Blues is kind of a fun one to explore. So with that, before we get any further, Josh, do you want to kick it off by introducing yourself and your work in games a little? Just let people know who you are before we dive in.
Yeah, so I'm Josh Domanski. What do I describe myself as? I am a writer, a layout designer, a development editor when I have time, and occasional actual play host over on the Weekly Scroll. But I haven't been able to do that in a while because work is all consuming. Most folk would probably recognize me from my work with Liminal Horror. That's certainly the most like recognizable work that I've done. But I kind of, dabble with whatever catches my fancy in a given moment. And this moment happens to be Orbital Blues.
Nice. Yeah. Well, I think that sets up nicely some of the things we're going to talk about today. You have even more games than that, but definitely want to cover Liminal Horror, Orbital Blues. Um, and Chris, I don't know if you're going to ask the traditional first question and kind of start at the beginning before we get into those deep game worlds.
I would love to. So yeah, Josh, for folks who don't know you, don't know your work, all that good stuff, what we normally ask first coming in is how did you get into tabletop role playing games, and how did you kind of transition into writing adventures and modules and things for a bunch of different systems, many of which are very excellently written, and yeah, they're just good.
So, um, I've been kind of like in the nerd and dork side of things basically my entire life. But I grew up in Central New York and in a Rust Belt town. Born in the '90s, kind of grew up into the 2000s and whatnot. Um, where being a dork wasn't cool, but it was also like at least it wasn't as bad as those people who played like Dungeons and Dragons or whatever. Uh, so I was still of the era where you'd get relentlessly bullied. It was kind of before nerd culture became pop culture. Blah blah blah. So I don't think I knew a single person that played a tabletop RPG until college, maybe. It just was not a thing, at least not in the circles that I was in. And like I said, I was in the dork circle. So if I wasn't doing it, then no one was doing it in my high school and whatnot. So I went quite a long time. One, having kind of that classic misconception of what it even is, like the dudes in the basement dressing up and whatnot, whatever. There's still plenty of that, but that's not necessarily the norm here. But I was primarily into stuff like Star Wars, um, a lot of like science fiction, getting into, even when I was pretty young, my dad had a pretty extensive library, just like random shit for sci-fi. And so I'd read a lot of that as a kid. That was kind of my bread and butter for a while. Um, but come to the 2000s, getting into like the 2008, 2009, 2010 period, I got really into like video games for sure. At first, it was, military shooters, blah, blah, your Call of Duties, your Medal of Honors, and whatnot. And then I kind of started getting into like Uncharted and Bioshock and these things that are very like narrative forward. And that kind of like hit, and I was in. And so I started playing a lot of these like games at the time, stuff I had missed, a lot of like really classic things. I started getting into like the podcast side of video games and listening to the people, and then eventually learning about like who made the game. So the voice actors, the studios, and all that stuff. So this ends up leading to what is a very classic introduction to tabletop RPGs in, at least the current scene, where a lot of those voice actors, Matt Mercer, Travis Willingham, Laura Bailey, they were part of this thing called Critical Role. And it was one of those things where I'm following all this video game stuff and I keep hearing all these people talking about this thing, this Critical Role. I'm like, what the hell is that? And pretty early, I think in campaign 1 that they did, I started getting in and as a listener, and like that was basically my introduction to tabletop RPGs in real form, not just like knowing it exists. And so I was a pretty big fan for a number of years. I don't really listen to them anymore. They kind of got away from what I like from a viewer perspective over the years. And I just kind of don't have the time for 4-hour episodes anymore. But I was about like, I think like 2016 or whatever. And then at the time I was working for a job where I was the youngest person in the entire crew. So I didn't really have a whole lot of like that social interaction. And then in 2018, I joined a new company that had a whole crew of like 20 somethings that they just hired. And one of them was like, "Hey, I'm running D&D. You should join." I'm like, "Yeah, I would love to join. I've been listening to this for years now and never played." So it was after college. It was pretty late in life that I first started. And the very first game I played, I still remember it now. It was a Halloween game. It was 10 Candles. Um, Incredible. Like the thing is like 10 Candles is the best game you've ever played the first time you play it. And then
Mhm.
once you know its tricks, it's not necessarily worse. It's just a different experience once you know exactly what it's doing.
Yeah, it has a different
But for the
replay
first
value.
time I ever sat down for a tabletop RPG, yeah. So that was like incredible. I still remember that. This is, I don't even know how many years ago, 8 years ago now. And that was great. And then we got into, I joined a little late for this group, and they were playing 5th edition D&D. So we get in like later on. I joined that group formally. I start playing the very first session. I play and I'm like, I don't want to be a player. I want to be a game master. And we pretty quickly kind of that one campaign we were running wasn't really supposed to be a long thing, and it kind of fell apart. And then so I very quickly kind of stepped into it. I became a GM, ran a really bad campaign, as is the rite of passage, and then started writing better campaigns. This gets up until COVID hits. Basically, the week of the lockdown is the week that my in-person group fell apart. We didn't really survive the transition to digital at that time. And we were having a little trouble with scheduling anyway. We all worked for the same company, but we all had sort of different roles. So our availability to play was kind of varied, and it wasn't a consistent thing that we could do. So the pandemic hit, and we all just kind of like weren't really feeling it. Um, I had started to get into a lot more other games. The group that I was playing was already doing a bunch of stuff. We did like Monster of the Week, we did Dungeon World, we did Quiet Year, we did For the Queen, just all these things on top of like the D&D campaign that we were running. And so it always had this really varied introduction to it. And then once the pandemic hit, I was basically just kind of started running digital games where every week I would do something. It would be at first I was running a Cypher system. I did that for like 3 months, where I think it was Tuesday night at the time, I would run a different one shot with anybody I could grab from one of the Discord servers. And just new thing every week, just whatever, just kind of running whatever. Met a ton of people, started really liking games, getting really good at GMing. During this time, the I had been paying attention to Mothership in the background. I hadn't really played Mothership at that point yet, but the community had put together in 2020, early 2020, the Dissonant Whispers Adventure Anthology book. And for any listener here, that is, I think, pound for pound, one of the best RPG books ever released. They put it together over the course of like a month. It's like I think 58 2-page adventures for a whole variety of systems. I've run like a third of them. There's some fucking bangers in that book. So I get that. That's my introduction to basically the OSR as a whole. Mothership, Merkborg, Electric Bastion Land was in there, Troika, all the whole things. And so I'm like, I love all these things. I'm gonna buy all these games. I'm gonna start really getting into it. And then so I'm getting into this whole scene here. I see this is a community effort. So I'm watching all these people that aren't really designers came together and made this thing. And then so it was really cool to see. Uh, so come a few months after that, I'm starting to get into the OSR stuff, and I'm getting really into like the odd like ecosystem there. Chris McDowell, the writer of Into the Odd and Electric Bastion Land, he starts putting out these videos where he's talking about how to like set up Electric Bastion Land, and he's using this program, Affinity Designer at the time. He's drawing all these maps and stuff for it. I'm like, that's really cool. I want to do that for my games. So I get Affinity Designer. And then I'm like, I'm going to start making my own stuff. And so like within like weeks after that, I put out some terrible thing from Merkborg. And then I started following it up with a bunch of pamphlets and stuff. And that kind of spiraled out, 6 years later, here we are talking about the zines that I make.
Excellent. I mean, wow, there's a lot to get into there. But first and foremost, always good to meet a fellow affinity enjoyer. Always,
Sure.
tip of the hat to you. Um, but I mean, yeah, wow, what an introduction going from 10 Candles into 5th edition D&D. I kind of can't imagine like more
Yeah.
polar different experiences. So I'm kind of curious what that was like for you, just kind of getting into it. Because like, I don't think that there's any coming in too late in life, but you came in, late in your own words, and you just like really dove in. But yeah, what was that like early on? Like when you were really kind of like exploring systems, did you find things that you grabbed onto that you liked in one and didn't like in the other, or what was that process like for you?
Yeah. So Um, the thing with like 5th edition D&D is, like I said, by the time I had started playing, I had spent years listening to it, and so I knew how to play, from a certain perspective. By the time that I had started doing it, it was kind of like second nature because this was I was mainly listening to Critical Role, but I was also listening to stuff like the One Shot Podcast Network, and other things. So they were getting into other games and stuff, and so I was kind of always like into tabletop RPGs and not just into 5th edition D&D. um but uh the it wasn't really ever like the math or the character builds or anything that particularly interested me, and I found out pretty quickly that I don't really like fantasy role playing all that much either. And so with 5th edition, when I ran my own little campaign from it, it was basically like a Dune ripoff, but with like elves and dwarves and stuff. Uh, and again, it was bad. It was terrible. I made a lot of mistakes, and so, but it was a learning opportunity. Whatever. Um,
Yeah,
but
that's what those first sessions are for, right? It's like
yeah.
you don't know what you're doing.
But with 10 Candles, it was basically all improv, and I hadn't done much in the way of like role playing at that point. I wasn't, doing like forum role playing or anything like that, but I feel like I was mentally prepared for it by having already been kind of in the ecosystem. And the players that I had in that home group were incredible, like just willing to kind of go for it, especially with like the 10 Candles perspective. So having a group that is all like bought in and ready for it and joining into that was always like really, really great, as a first starter. And then when we got into 5th edition, it was a lot of, like jackassery and goofing around. So we weren't really rolling dice all that often. Um,
Yeah, totally. I mean, I also feel like we've talked a lot on this show about different arcs and ways into becoming a game designer, and one is the sort of perma GM, and a lot of people do start with D&D, and sometimes in childhood or later. And another, I think, is that revelation, the aha of like beyond D&D. But something, just to connect the dots there, because we talk a lot about genre, but it's interesting how you're also talking about playing with genre. And I think those things go together. So like D&D does tend, and games like it tend to really focus on fantasy. And when you start playing with games that have modern themes or like adult themes, not meaning like sexy, but just like more relevant to like a person with a job, a day job, paying bills. Like I think a lot of that to me is not even about what mechanics. It's just like, oh yeah, that's a whole world to explore and make games about that doesn't involve like dwarves and centaurs and stuff.
Mhm.
And then definitely 10 Candles is a pretty mind blowing like mechanic to sort of start with for like, okay, how would that work? So it's kind of fun to hear you mention some of these background elements, thinking about having just read some of your recent work. Because again, you're pretty prolific, I will say, of the folks we have on the show. So I don't know if that's a good segue into like horror, but I think of I guess I encountered your work through Liminal Horror and thought, oh, you're someone who's thinking a lot about different kinds of spooky and or chilling, thrilling, and or philosophically interesting, like the Dorian Gray game, right? Like these narratives that play with kind of self and threats to the self in different ways, not like in a combat D&D sense. So I'm curious to hear you reflect on how basically what you decided to design when you started designing, because you said you sort of played around with the Merc board, but eventually you're doing your own thing. So how did you kind of begin to approach given that you've now mentioned like every genre, right? Fantasy, sci-fi, all these things, how did you start to work out like what Josh D's like game design looks like, if that makes sense?
Um, so like I said at the top, it kind of just whatever takes my fancy at a given time. I'm interested in narrative. Whether that comes from a book, whether it comes from a television show, what have you, video game. Again, the video games, like narrative video games, were real big when I was kind of getting into the gaming sphere. Um, and so tabletop RPGs present this really unique experience. There's no other medium that's like this because every time, let's say you're running a module isn't not supposed to be the writer telling you a story. A module is a conversation between you, the writer, and the players at your table, and then through that triangle, it comes together into this narrative experience that again is unique. You can't replicate that anywhere else because how do you get they call it the writer's reproach sometimes in tabletop games, but um, there are things that are going to happen that you can't anticipate, like as a GM or as a writer, and those are the beautiful moments that come up in play. So pretty early on, that was what I really latched onto when it comes to games, and I'm not really if we want to talk like cultures of play or whatever, I don't stick with like just OSR or whatever. I kind of go with whatever takes my fancy. I'll do like a Neotrad game when it comes up if it's interesting. I do a lot of story games. I think the story game movement is currently the most like exciting one in terms of like game design because they're constantly still iterating and pushing ways to which you can use mechanics to reinforce narrative elements and procedures of play and whatever. So it's kind of just, do I have a core idea in mind that I think would really work for my table? And I think that that's kind of the core experience of it. I still run games every week. And if I was not running games, I wouldn't be writing games. Uh, so I've been with the same, pair of players for the last almost 6 years now because the group I'm currently with got together uh, about 6 months into COVID. But I run an open table server, and I have two consistent players that are there basically every week, and then I have like 20 people that kind of filter in and out depending on whatever I'm running. And so one, it's like, what are the people at my table going to like? What am I going to like to run? What do I think is going to entertain myself? And that's what I start writing. That's where I kind of go from. The second part is I like the adventure as allegory. Like I really like the adventure as allegory angle. So a lot of the stuff that I write, especially I contribute to projects where I'm not necessarily the project lead, but whenever I'm usually the project lead, there is some like underlying theme that I think is interesting that kind of sets up the project I'm working on. So if we talk about the early stuff that I worked on, in terms of like zine level, not just like the pamphlets and small things, there was a level 0 funnel for old school essentials that I helped out on called Tangled, where Tangled is a dungeon crawl. You walk in and it's a plant monster that you have to kind of fight in the end. But the entire theme of Tangled is the impact of civilization upon nature and lingering environmental disasters even long after the person who created them has passed away, because it features this druid that like imbued a plant with magic, and then once the druid passed, the plant kind of continued to grow and now it's threatening a town. So it's nature has been perverted by the interaction of, I'm gonna say, mankind, even if it was like an elf or whatnot.
Civilization. Yeah.
Yeah. So while you're never really interacting with that on a direct level in the adventure, that's the theme. It's environmentalism is the theme of it. Then we get into the Bureau for Liminal Horror, which is the second kind of big zine that I worked on, and the Bureau is heavily inspired by the video game Control, and it wears it on its sleeve. I would never deny that. But the entire theme with the Bureau is we when you play Control, it is power fantasy. Control is you start as a normal character, Jesse Faden, who walks into the FBC, the Federal Bureau of Control, and becomes the director. And through the course of the game, you gain more power and more power, to the point where you kind of defeat the central tension at the end of the game. But the whole point of the game is that it's taking control, and then you, in the end, end up as the director of this FBI-like organization. And the thing with the Bureau is it takes that idea and turns it to horror, where it's like, if you as players end up at the head of the Bureau by the end of that module, that's the bad ending. you know, you're not supposed to want that, because the entire time you're playing, you're learning that the Bureau is kind of a fucked up organization.
Right,
Uh,
right.
so where the Bureau's theme is it's the corruption of systems of power that is the central theme of the Bureau. Where in the middle horror, there's this mechanic called Fallout, which Fallout are changes to your character that are like horrific in nature. And so as you interact, as you gain Fallout and gain power, as you're going through the Bureau, uh, things are getting worse and worse up to the top. And then once you get to the end, you find the very center of the corruption, and it's the director of the organization and the person who leads the building. And then so you can root out that corruption at its source if you want, or you can succumb to it and then fall to the system power or whatever. So those are just kind of two examples. Like, I can keep talking about this all day because it's my favorite topic, but just to keep it brief. So that's the core of it. Like, is this going to be interesting to me to play? And then what other thing can I talk about through a RPG module?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's something that we definitely share with you, is like trying to politicize modules and adventures, and I mean even core games themselves, like Stillfleet and Danse Macabre, the games that Wythe and I have worked on. They're that's always the background radiation, is that there is like a politics that you are actually
Yeah.
interacting with, and not just murder hoboing your way across the galaxy or whatever.
Yeah, and I also think it's fun to figure out that in conversation with players, because that's very much my impulse, like as a communist, is to make games where like you're
Right.
doing something, useful for other humans. And in today's world, that would put you in conflict pretty quickly with like tech companies and AI and military complexes and governments of various kinds. You know, and I think that's fun to think about as like a designer and like write things about. But in terms of actually playing with players, that's always been, I think, something we also have talked a lot about is like play testing actual um, and being open to actual changes, because sometimes you have a good idea that seems like a fun way to mechanicalize something. And maybe it's also just for me, like it's funny you brought up story games, because I feel like that's a space that I'm a little bit skeptical of, but obviously it does have a lot of energy. To your point, there's a lot of cool innovation, and so
Yeah.
maybe it's just like a matter of trying it out more, to get used to it, in the same way that if you're used to designing mechanics around adventuresome dice rolling, you kind of know more or less how to sort of steer the ship. But I think it's great to like have a consistent playtest group and really try to marry those two things, like player experience with your intention as a designer, and kind of like you said, the underlying theme. Like
Mhm.
what is the game about? Maybe we can get into that a little bit with Paramore,
I was
and
gonna I was
also
gonna say.
Yeah, and also horror, because again, I think like the Bloom, shout out one of maybe one of your bigger liminal horror. I know there's a bunch, but like
The Bloom is the one we were nominated for an NE for, but didn't win it. The
well,
Mall
there you
is
go.
the one that we were nominated and did win, so it's
Ah.
50-50.
Okay. Uh, and then also the Dorian Gray game, I think, is just really brilliant. Salutations, which is, I think, maybe going more in that story game direction. I mean, I know it's using trophy, there's dice rolling, but it feels like it's really
Mhm.
setting up specific beats in a story. So, I think there's various ways to take it, but, I'm curious about maybe if you want to take an example of how you went from start to finish with one of your games, and then in the process you can tell us, all about that game and how interesting it is. But I'm curious kind of how you go about, I guess, getting in front of those weekly players, which is
Yeah.
just, again, great that you have that sort of baked in.
Let's see. Let's talk about the Bloom because I think that's kind of fun to go from start to finish there. So the Bloom is it's the third official module for Liminal Horror that we released. It's technically the second one that I worked on. Um, when I didn't help create Liminal Horror, I joined a few months after the original zine had come out, and I've basically kind of touched everything else that's come out since then. Um, where when I joined, Goblin Archives is my writing partner. He's the one who created Liminal Horror. I pitched the bureau to him, and then that's kind of how we started writing together. And it's basically everything else. Like I'll talk a lot about Liminal Horror stuff, but I do want to note that it's not just me writing it. Um, so when I pitched it, he was already working on the mall, and I did a little bit of like consultation and stuff on there. So my name's in the credits, but that's kind of like pretty minimal, all things considered. So any of the accolades, that's all Goblin Archives there. But we at the time that he was working on the mall, I had pitched the bureau, and then we started writing that together. So we write the bureau uh, from the initial pitch, which had a little bit written, to completion to hand over to the publisher was 3 months. Which was we have never made that pace again. It's fucking incredible. I also was working on Tangled at the time, and I finished that in the same time period, and so it's like I can't do that ever again. I don't know what
Do
happened.
you, yeah, do you hate yourself? Is there is
Yeah,
there a reason?
it just all flowed. I was
Yeah,
writing the
yeah.
layout too, so that really helps.
Sure, sure. I mean, but sometimes that happens, right? Like
Yeah,
sometimes you just have an idea and it just kind of like falls out of you because you just know what you want to do with it, or
yeah,
you've been stewing on it for long enough, or it's just you just hit the right notes and it just comes out easy.
yeah. And so the bureau happens, and the mall happens. We release them for Exalted Funeral was doing a like a convention, like a digital convention at the time. This is like 2022, I think, if I remember correctly. And behind the scenes, we were helping the convention and stuff too. We were going to do some stuff for it, so we were kind of like getting real big into that. Um, and so we do all this lead up. It's really cool. We're firing on all gears. We get the thing out and we release. And after that point, we're kind of like, all right, what next? I was formally sort of incorporated into the Liminal Horror team, which is it's three of us plus our publisher at this point, so it's not like it's a big thing. Um, after that, I skipped a little bit. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you dropped out a little bit, but I just keep
Still
going.
good?
I'm not sure how much control. If it's just an internet blip, then we'll cut this out of
May
the
have just been a blip,
podcast.
but okay.
Can you hear us?
So yeah, we're
Okay, cool. Yeah.
good. So we do the bureau, and it was like that was like one of the best writing experiences I've ever had. And so we're like, okay, we're gonna keep writing together. I that's where I was, officially joined onto the team. I was, and we've kind of continued from that point forward. And the bloom kind of comes out of two things. One, I had an idea for a follow up for the bureau where the idea is that you don't have to run any of the liminal horror zines in any order. We make them so you can kind of pick up and play whenever you want, but there is a background narrative that we have in our heads about how these things connect to each other. We do the anti-canon approach where it's like we're never going to establish some of these things formally, but it's like we talk about them behind the scenes because they kind of impact how we want to write. So I have the answers. I'm just not going to tell you. So I had this idea for the bloom about kind of following it up. But uh, looking at what we had for Liminal Horror already, we had the mall, which is very much like well, there's two ways to play it, and the way I like is that it's a really big like faction heavy game where you're not necessarily doing a lot of exploration in the mall. You're doing a lot of like fighting for resources, and you can't really trust that the people you're interacting with have good intentions in mind. So it's a big faction play. And then the bureau was dungeon crawl. They very much, I call it a mega dungeon, but that's arguable. It's like 5 floors, whatever. So we have factions, we have dungeon. Let's do sandbox. So we wanted a big kind of open area where you're not confined in such a degree and you can kind of go all these places in whatever direction. So, and then we wanted to keep it contained because we needed to do it in 40 pages. So in comes the town of Coldwater. It's a fictional town in kind of like central Washington. It's a little ambiguous. I have a pretty good idea where I think it would be, but it's it's fake. So Coldwater comes in, and all of the Liminal Horror stuff is set in the Pacific Northwest. So this kind of followed suit. So Coldwater itself is based off of Crater Lake in Oregon because it's a caldera lake that it's set around. And then the town of Coldwater is technically based off of Old Forge, New York, because I spent time there as a child when I ripped that town up and put it into Washington and then added a bunch of like Washington stuff into it. And then we got a bunch of like stuff that surrounds the town itself. So we got the setting. It's like, okay, cool. Now what's our central tension? And there's two things that kind of define how we started to set up the central tension. Both of them are very real. The first is that like I said, I grew up in upstate New York or central New York, and New York is a really interesting state where New York City kind of sucks up all of the energy of the state. But then you have kind of a couple of big cities. You have your Albany, your Syracuse, your Buffalo, your Rochester, that are kind of all spread apart. It's between Syracuse and Rochester is like an hour and a half. If you want to go to Buffalo, it's like 2.5 hours. So you got these like pretty big distance between it. You take the throughway. You're not really you get on the highway and you go there. But when you go from one of those cities and you drive like a half hour, I just not on the highway, it kind of feels like you're going back in time. Where these places, the Rust Belt was running straight through New York, and so once all the factories and all the industry left, it kind of left a lot of people in dire straits. So you have this places that have not changed, have not really updated in decades because there's nothing there, and they're impoverished. These places, the houses are kind of falling apart, and when you go to these places, they are very resistant to change as well, even if that change is going to be positive. And sometimes it's not. There's like Micron has moved up into the region right now, and it's kind of wreaking havoc on some of the smaller towns. So stuff like that's kind of bad. But there's this stubbornness there, despite the fact that this town is kind of dead, for all intents and purposes. And so the idea of the bloom stems from that, where there are a bunch of people who live in this town of Coldwater who do not want Coldwater to change and have this idealized vision of what they think Coldwater is, despite the fact that it has never been that. And so that sinks in the background while the horror is going on. And because of this desire to keep things the same, they ignore the horror up until the point where it's too late and the town falls. So that's your underlining theme that kind of runs through it. It's putting your head into the sand and ignoring the danger around you until it's too late. The second part is the reality, and it came from reading about this this little periodical that I was reading at the time, where the single largest living organism on the planet is not a blue whale. It is a giant cluster of fungus beneath the national forest in Northern Oregon. They call it the humongous fungus. It's like, I think it's like 2 square miles of fungus beneath the ground. That is one organism. It's this huge thing. And the problem is you can't really kill it. And it's like it's a type of parasitic fungus. It kills trees. It causes rot or whatever. It's somewhat stable, at least the big one, but it can cause a lot of problems if you introduce it into the wrong ecosystem. And if there are spores that come from this fungus that kind of get into your wood, get into anything, they can live forever, basically. It's very hard to kill. So you can't get rid of this fungus short of burning the forest down if you want to. And that's the thing. If you notice the root rot or whatever from this fungus, you got to clear cut anything like 50 feet or else it's going to spread. And so that's like terrifying, in like a real way where that it's thankfully it's fairly benign. Like this massive organism isn't like wreaking havoc in that forest there. It's just kind of doing its own thing for now. But what if it wasn't? What if something happened? And we kind of take that reality and then add the fantasy or the paranatural, whatever you want to it, and that's where the bloom comes from, where there was this fungal cluster living beneath the town of Coldwater. It was fairly benign, and then something happens. We think we have a pretty good idea what that something is. We very intentionally don't talk about what the something is in the module. And so something happens, the fungus mutates, and then it kind of starts doing the cordyceps thing where it begins infecting people and turning them into zombies and whatnot. And then that whole thing is now spreading throughout and underneath Coldwater up to the point where the town falls.
Yeah, and it's great that then again I think these are just things to underline for people who may be listening with some interest in module design, but in creating a sandbox you also have this tension, and then you've broken it up in a very digestible, well-written sandbox. But it's like animating that, or the things you just described about sort of a nightmare version of the humongous fungus that's just pushed a little into what I think of as science fiction, right? The science fictionality is coming from a real thing that you're just like giving a little shove into horror. And it could, maybe it could be one day that it's a little bit like Last of Us, right? And
Right.
other narratives that take that same approach of, okay, there's all kinds of parasitic fungi, and they have different means of adapting to a rapidly changing world. As the world changes more and more rapidly, who knows? Who's to say, that one of these things isn't going to sort of pop off and create sort of hosts, right? Like sort of fungal zombies. And then the sandbox approach is great because, yeah, you're drawing on real inspiration, places you've lived, places you're interested in. But again, breaking it up and making it really for a player and GM. So there's not, this is a very light. It's 48 pages, so it's as zines go, it's pretty full, but it's very light. It's not. It doesn't have like long descriptions of your childhood or something, right? It has like lots of useful lists, beats to walk through, NPCs, locations, things you'd want from a sandbox. And so I think for a horror mystery, like it's a great setting. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
go
we,
ahead.
we
Sorry.
refer to it as we call it a module, whatever, and we mean that in more of like the classic sense where it's a modular toolkit, where it's like um, we have got a bunch of play experience, so I know this is a thing. Someone can take the bloom and run it, and it's going to be totally different experience than what happens at my table, what happens at your table, what have you, because there's that conversation going on that I talked about, where we give you the toolkit, we give you the framework to set this up, and then what happens is what happens. You kind of got to figure it out yourself from there.
No, I love that, and this is very much the approach. We just published digitally, and it's going off to the printer. But this big mega dungeon underneath France in medieval times in a zombie apocalypse, and it's the same thing. If there's not one right way to play it, there's like a bunch of possible quests that are related to different factions who want different things that require you to go into the tunnels that have been dug out into the quarries. So I think it's fun. It's a fun approach, whatever the word you use for it, but kind of to think of a setting that you're inspired by, and then okay, how do I break that up and make it useful for other GMs, right? Do you want to walk us through, because you were saying kind of beginning to end with the bloom, just to round that out? Anything about how it came out, what made it so successful for you, as a module, and something that you've seen other people pick up and use? Any tips, things like that you want to sort of shout out?
So in terms of framework, the I have to shout out Desert Moon of Karth. That was by Joel Hines for Mothership. It's one of the early like third party darlings for Mothership. That was like that's paved the way for the Bloom. Where I read it, I haven't run Desert Moon of Karth. Unfortunately, I didn't. It wasn't going to fit into kind of like how I was running my table when I got it. It probably still doesn't really fit. But from a module perspective, it's great. How it sets up its sandbox. It does like a point crawl. It does a lot of factions and stuff. So we took a lot of inspiration from that, using that as a basis. But the rest of it is Um, it's all based in the logic of how a town like this exists. You have the town as the central point. You have a campground for tourism. You have the lake because, Coldwater Lake has to be kind of a big feature of itself. So that gets its own little portion in the text. And then there's the underlying communities that surround the town, the houses and whatnot, the trailer parks or what have you. And again, all of this is very much inspired by, Old Forge, New York. And if you go look at Old Forge and you go look at Coldwater, you're going to find a lot of similarities, and that's kind of intentional because I took a real community and then made a module about it, and then twisted it into fantasy. But so the framework there is reality. You have all these places, and then you have to decide what's going to be fun for play, because I don't need to detail every single house in a neighborhood because it's like that's not really important to the horror that's going on. So we pick a few locations that have things going on that are going to be interesting. So we have like the Heinz Farm, I think is one of the ones that's a kind of a key one to the mystery there. And we need to then figure out ways in which to draw the players to these locations by design. So Heinz Farm is a producer of blueberries, which is a crop in the region here. So Heinz Farm becomes important and it starts to draw clues. It starts to point you in that direction because when you arrive in Coldwater, the Blueberry Fest is going on. And the Blueberry Fest is based off of this festival. I think it's there's a special berry around here that I completely forgot the name of. But there is a festival in a small town in northern Oregon that I based the Blueberry Fest off of. So kind of like using it idea again, using reality to influence it. So the Blueberry Fest is happening, and they don't have blueberries in the quantity that they want because something happened at the Heinz farm. So you've got location that we set up that has mystery at it. You have clues are going to point to that direction because you're there for this festival and something's off about the festival. So, okay, go explore. Then you get clues there. Then you're going to start drawing you in other directions, what have you. So it's really about finding that connective tissue. We can't just throw down a bunch of shit on the map. It has to have a reason to be there because we have 40 pages to do this. And then there's a couple of other features in there. We have we call it the lodge, where it's this lodge that's literally perched on the mountain looking down upon Coldwater. So if you're in the town itself and you look up, you see that lodge. So the players are going to have that visual cue. Okay, something's weird, something's going up there. And then, okay, so how do we get the players to go in that direction? Okay, we put a couple of weirdos that live in the lodge. And they're not like really weirdos. They are so normal that they are weird to the town. Uh, and so this couple lives up there. They bought it. It used to be a source of tourism. It used to be a hunting lodge. So people are mad about it. Okay, so you have weirdos, and the townsfolk are mad about them. They're going to talk about them. Okay, there you go. Those are clues that are seeding in there. Go look up what's happening at these people up there. Maybe they're involved with the weird stuff that's happening with the town. You go up there and you find something. I'm not going to spoil it because it's fun. You find something that's kind of related to the mystery, and then that asks more questions, and you're going to keep on kind of spinning that direction. So um, the uh, the concept that I call this, and it's not really unique, is it's the web of information, where uh, all of these things exist for a reason when it comes to the way that they have to play out at the table. And it's not just that there's one connection to this, it's a spider web of it. So, this connects to this, connects to this, and so on and so forth. And so you start to kind of naturally drive players in the directions you want them to look simply by writing cool things and then bringing these connections to each other. And then the cool thing about this that I really love is you can get away with writing less because you have these connections. So we can do a sandbox on 40 pages because it's all interconnected. We can write, a spread on one thing, and then because it's got that connection, you don't need to do anything else.
That's amazing. Yeah, writers who hate or writers who get paid by word hate this one weird trick. Um, that's great. Yeah, I like the idea. Like, I like the idea of the web of information and kind of setting it up that way. Because the thing that keeps coming to mind to me as you're talking about this kind of design is thinking about modules as these kind of permeable envelopes, right? Like in audio design, you have your volume envelope, things like that. But like your players can still kind of push against it. They can break out of it if they need to. But having the web of information kind of allows you to have that freedom, but also have your fun red herrings and your clues and your weirdos who I'm assuming are just like opening a B&B and do yoga or something like that, and the town hates it.
Yeah, and I also think this is a great maybe segue into how you apply this across genres and games. Because again, unlike so we often have people on the show who are focused either in sort of a thing they're doing or writing for an existing system or maybe within a genre. And I think one of the things that characterizes your oeuvre is that it's hard to characterize beyond a certain like mood or utility or elegance, but it's kind of all over the place, right? So I think it'll be interesting to hear kind of how you're approaching Paramore for Orbital Blues. But just quickly, I also think at the level of genre, it is interesting because to your point, I was thinking about sandbox and mega dungeon and these terms we use, and how much of it, at least for me, because I grew up with the second edition of the Dragon game and like reading even older stuff from the 80s that my older brother had. And so I learned these genres the way they were written in the 80s and 90s, which tended toward this like speculative anthropology, which I love. Like I'm an anthropologist and I loved reading these long ass books with like lore, but I never used any of it. I never used a word of it. I never ran a single module as written. I find it's instantly boring. It like puts me to sleep to try to do it. So I like love the stuff that, writers like you produce. And I'd like to think, I'm more in that tradition, although I do feel like maybe I'm, you know, um, somewhat unfrozen caveman in that sense. But it's interesting to think about how the same approach, like having an open world to explore with NPCs and locations, you can kind of condense to a few useful tables that are elegantly linked, in this web, where the PCs are naturally, the players rather, are naturally going to want to go, from the town to Pickman Lodge, from the town to the lake, eventually find caves, go into the woods, whatever, and it doesn't need to be sort of one linear path, but also we actually don't need that much of the town to get a sense of where this is. So I think that is an interesting balancing act and a good way to approach it, especially maybe for designers who are like not as committed to writing hundreds of pages and they want to write a good zine. So it's really cool. I think the Bloom is a good example of that, and I again it's you even have rules actually for multiple other systems. So it is a liminal horror game, but you have these other conversions. So it definitely feels like you're thinking, capaciously, from that inciting kernel of like, okay, weird town, kind of upstate New York, rural Oregon. Like, what are some cool things I want to pull out? So turning to Paramore, with time, not infinite. Can you tell us a little about Orbital Blues, how you got involved in Orbital Blues Month, and how did you go about approaching something in that world, which I know you've written for before, but in this case, maybe a project, hopefully with kind of a bigger spotlight with Orbital Blues Month. How did you sort of settle on a task
Yeah,
there?
yeah. How did you get the blues, Josh?
So, so my introduction to Soul Muppet is Best Left Buried Deeper. This is when they took their Best Left Buried system. It was their flagship at the time, and it was across 3 books. They did a Kickstarter which condensed it into the deeper book, the current version of it. And I think they changed some rules and stuff like that. Best Left Buried itself was a like a hacker iteration of Maze Rats. I think that's kind of how I found out about it as well. I don't really love Maze Rats, to be honest, but I do really like Best Left Buried. If that kind of makes sense. Oh, I know about Maze Rats because it was an Into the Odd hack, and so there you go. There's my
Yeah,
connection.
yeah. No, I think that makes sense. I mean, it's a permutation on it. Of course, there's going to be additions and things that are, like changed and adjusted for taste. So I don't think that's weird at all, actually, to like not really love. I also don't like Maze Rats, but I kind of love Knave in a weird way. Like
Yeah.
it's like tiny differences, but it makes a world of difference to me.
Right. So Best Left Buried is great because it's this is one of those true underrated hidden gems or whatever. Best Left Buried has some fucking incredible modules for it. Soul Muppet always knows how to hire good writers when it comes to it. They call I think it's Behind Closed Doors. I think that's what it's called. The one by Luke Gehring is the best Warhammer adventure written for a system that's not Warhammer. Um, and so that's kind of like getting into this ecosystem, and then like, okay, I like Best Left Buried. I like all these books. I immediately know I'm going to like what Soul Muppet is doing, kind of no matter what. So a little while afterwards, they crowdfund Orbital Blues. I still have my Kickstarter exclusive copy with an alternate cover. Um, so Orbital Blues is a iteration of the Soul Muppet core system. I don't know if they have a proper name for it, but it's the one that they use for Best Left Buried. They take it and they kind of spin it into Orbital Blues. And this hit me like a fucking truck, and it was just the right time. I was getting into story games, I was into the OSR, and it's Orbital Blues is a OSR framework with story game elements bolted onto it. And so it's like that was a match made in heaven for me. And as a triple threat, it's not Cowboy Bebop the RPG, but it's probably about as close as you can get to it. And Cowboy Bebop is one of my favorite pieces of media in existence. And so trifecta,
Yeah,
coming
yeah.
in. And
I mean, it's such a powerful piece of media, really. I mean, I said to Zach when we were interviewing them the other week, that like you can't see even a still from that show without Tank, like the first sting of Tank just like hitting you like a brick in the face.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, and then so beyond Sam Selini and Zach, who are the writers for Orbital Blues, kind of getting that initial impression. The book is like one of the best RPG teams that's ever been assembled. You have Jared Sinclair who's doing editing, Josh Clark was doing art, and Lone Archivist on layout, and it's like this book is something special. I have some gripes with it, here and there, because I'm never going to love everything about a book. But again, this was so right for me right at the time, and it still is now. I call myself the internet's biggest Orbital Blues fan, mainly because I think it's funny. But I'm constantly fucking talking about this game.
You're the
And
internet's only Orbital Blues fan.
there are some of us.
Well, we're the only games podcast. You're the only Orbital Blues fan.
Yeah. That was not a dig, to be clear.
No, not a dig at all.
Yeah.
No, please. Obviously, there's millions of fans of Orbital Blues.
Yeah, but if you go on Reddit and you see somebody talk about Orbital Blues, it's probably me.
I mean, that's good. You gotta cheer for the home team, right?
Yeah. So Orbital Blues comes out. Like I said, it hits me like a truck. And so every year since Orbital Blues has come out, I run a campaign. And what I do is I really, really love this system for episodic campaigns, where I run it like Cowboy Bebop, where we do 4 to 6 sessions. Each is basically a one shot, and then by the end of it, I connect them all in some manner, and we have a finale. And again, I run like one shots and stuff with it occasionally too, but this is like my core group I'll do this with once a year. And so we did the Sutler system that was in the book. We did My Secret Weapon, which is taking old West End Games Star Wars RPG modules from the first few years they released specifically, and then using those in Orbital Blues and getting rid of the aliens. Some of the best sessions I've ever had have been doing that. So go look at some of those old one shots that West End Games put out, because they got some gas to them. And then I did All That Glitters for one of them, and I kind of split that up into a bunch of like different segments rather than trying to run it as like a module. And then I did Rogue Anthems is the most kind of recent one that I did, where Rogue Anthem is a collection of like 12 pamphlets. I think I ran 6 of them or something like that. But like I said, every year I'm doing this thing, and that kind of gets me into writing my own. I wrote Starfall a few years ago. Starfall at the time, I think, was the third party Orbital Blues adventure that had gone out, something like that, maybe first even. There weren't a whole lot of them either way at that time. And Starfall was just a quick little like 2-week project, I think, for me. It's not like it's something that flies off the shelves or anything like that. And it's only been digital because it's like 12 pages. But Starfall, I try and run some holiday themed thing every year, just because I think it's kind of funny to do it, sometime that December, January period of time. And so a few years ago, I wanted to do Orbital Blues Holiday Edition because I wanted Sad Holiday. And so the basis for Starfall was what the hell is it? I think it's Anne McCaffrey is the name of the author, who did the Dragonriders of Pern series. Yeah, that's what, Anne McCaffrey.
Yeah, it's Anne. That's good old Anne.
I
love those covers.
Yeah, I haven't read Dragonriders of Pern. I've read a single book from that series, and it was the prequel that was written like years after the original. And I didn't read that time.
There's like 30 of them, right?
There's a lot.
There's a lot of them. Yeah.
And so the prequel is a science fiction book, which is really great. And that's what I was reading when I was a kid. And it left this really big impression on me where the whole thing is like it sets up uh the the central tension there where they need to breed dragons because there's like weird shit raining from the sky. But it's that the planet drags itself through an orc cloud that picks up these weird organisms and rains them down onto the planet, and it's gonna like kill people. So they breed dragons about it.
Hey, that's pretty sick. I'm actually kind of on board
Yeah.
for Pern right now.
That book
Pern,
is great.
it also goes back to the 60s. It's like Last of Us and Dragonlance, but way before either. So it's like a real weird flex. I also like had those books, and I don't think I actually read them. I think my dad had them, a bunch of them at least. But now I feel really bad, and I need to like read Dragonriders of Pern. So sorry, Josh. Please continue telling us
Pern,
about your amazing Orbital Blues work. But
Yeah.
Pern book club, Pern book
Pern
club.
Book
We'll
Club.
do it.
I'm
We'll do it on
hearing
the
is
we'll do it on the
exactly-
server.
I got to go reread that book. It's been on my list for a little while.
Join the Pern book club.
Yeah. And so that idea has just been like in my head for, 20 years now. And so when Starfall came along, I was like, I need a holiday and I need something, it's going to be, holiday themed. So I was like, okay, this planet has asteroid cloud. It goes through, it does the same thing, but instead of raining disease, it rains meteorites, and it's a big event. It happens every year, blah, blah, blah. Very stylistically similar to an event that happens in Andor. I will note that that was not the inspiration, even if it is very close. um,
You don't get this one, Disney. This is one
yeah.
IP you can't lay your fingers on. No, no,
So
no.
So I have a holiday. It's okay, meteor showers, and then I'm like, okay, let's get this planet, and then I need a framework for it. So I'm like, okay, we're gonna do a little like reverse heist. You have to go infiltrate a party because you've been paid by an executive to deliver something to them that they forgot. Your Uber, your whatever. So you're doing that, and then when you're in the middle of the party, a pirate emerges and starts robbing the place, and then you have to kind of figure your way out. So 12 pages. It's a little one shot. I did it in a very intentional trophy inspired format where it's kind of just like, here are 3 acts. I'm going to give you some pieces. Good luck. I'm going to go through and fix it because we're doing a revamp for Paramore. We're going to add Starfall in as one of the tiers. So it's like, okay, so I put that out and it's like, okay, this is like one of, the only Orbital Blues zines that are out there. I'm still playing, I'm still talking about Orbital Blues, and I'm just like, I don't have the time to write the Orbital Blues zine that I wanted to write at the time. And it's mainly, Treasure Island, but in space. Well, maybe we'll see that one, but that's a whole thing that I need to figure out at some point. But uh, so this is all happening. I'm still paying attention. I'm still buying everything that Soul Muppet's putting out anyway. And so the announcement kind of goes out that Orbital Blues Month is happening. I'm like, I need to get in on this. I don't have time for this, but I do have time for this. So I put in my bid, and it gets accepted basically immediately, and that's where Paramore kind of comes out of. Uh, so Paramore, uh, to me, hits on something that is core to the Orbital Blues experience that their current modules and adventures do not touch on, and that is Lost Love, where if you look through the troubles, basically the character classes, if you want to call it that, in Orbital Blues, there are some that kind of deal with these things. But if you look at their the adventures that have been put out for it, they're all kind of powder keg situations that you get involved with, where I wanted something that was personal. I wanted something that hit your characters immediately and, was all about how much you feel because it's Orbital Blues. So you got to have those bad feelings.
You got to have the blues. Yeah, you were looking for the Julia moments, the like rare appearances of Julia from Cowboy Bebop.
Exactly. And so that's the idea. It's like, I want something focused on romance, and not like active romance about lost love and this, again, playing on nostalgia, this idealized past that your characters had, the things that caused them to feel the blues or whatever. These are all things that are like very present in the games that I run, because I run with my prime players. They love doing romance stuff now, which is really fun to role play. And so it's like, okay, I want something, I'm going to run with them. And so I get this pitch. It's like, okay, Paramore, a former flame has resurfaced. You're kind of coincidentally there, and you have to kind of figure out how you want to manage it. So that's basically my pitch is, and then I kind of spin that into what Paramore is now, where it's based around this character, Cassandra Cross, who is Cassandra is a space scoundrel. She's kind of like Han Solo. That's the easy way to think about it, where somebody that is noteworthy enough for being kind of a piece of shit, you know. And someone of your crew, your Orbital Blues crew, used to be in a relationship of some form with Cassandra Cross at some unspecified time period back in the day. What I do here is we introduce 3 new troubles into the zine here, and the intention here is very much focus on the drama. Where one of the requirements of the module is like, hey, one of you has to take this new trouble, even if it's just for the arc. You can ignore your other one, just take this for now. That's how we spin it in, and then we've got 2 more that are like, if you think you want to add to the interesting dynamics, have them take that as well. Where we have the lost lover, who, the former person who was in a relationship with Cassandra Cross. The other is, I forgot the titles I gave all these things, but the other one is somebody who used to work with Cassandra Cross and got screwed over at some point. So another relationship. Maybe they're connected to, the other player character, but we don't know at this point. And then the third one is somebody who took comfort in hearing the stories of Cassandra Cross and are sort of a fanatic about them. So you have former lover, you have somebody who got screwed over by Cassandra, and then you have somebody who's a fan of Cassandra, and that's your crew, the core of your troubles. And you get into the system, Cassandra Cross comes up over the bounty board, and there's like a super high bounty on her. And you kind of have to figure out, all right, what are we going to do here? One of your characters has a really good idea of where Cassandra Cross is hiding at the moment. And so you've got this central tension, and then you kind of can approach it in different ways, where Cassandra is planning a heist. I don't necessarily need to get into the heist details all that much, because it's the means in which the tension is introduced, but the specifics of the heist are kind of unimportant. So she's going to go do a heist. It's not going to go well. If you don't do anything, it's going to fail, basically. That's kind of the setup we've given. But you can go help her out. You can go and try and collect the bounty on Cassandra Cross. Get back at her for, leaving you at the altar or whatever. Or you can just kind of like screw around and make a big mess of it. You can try and rob Cassandra Cross too, and intersect on the heist. So you've got all these ways in which you can interact with it.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, even from the brief description, you can really see how you're, pardon the pun, but spinning the web of information and kind of allowing for that conversation between yourself as author, the module, and the player, like the entire table, right? Like, I like the idea of having these like kind of set roles that you're starting out with, because it does give you this like inherent tension that you can just jump out of as a player, which is really cool.
It also works really cinematically nicely, I think, as a GM and with players who can go on that journey as well. Because I think unlike great novels, which require like stream of consciousness and like really inhabiting someone else's head, games function much more like listening to a song or watching a dope action movie, where the logic can kind of be picked up and like dropped off, and then you pick back up a refrain. And I think if you watch like the Fast Furious movies or the Ocean movies or even the Coen Brothers extended cinematic universe, there's sort of touchstones. There's things that get picked up, leitmotifs that we're reminded of, and then they're just dropped off. So like The Rock's character is always, I think in all of the things he's in, it's written into his writer, like, I'm a great dad. And like, it doesn't really matter until suddenly it like, okay, let's have the terrorist kidnap his daughter. So there's sort of these buttons you can hit as a GM. And I think that's really great that Orbital Blues does this in general. And it's a story game element that I'd like to port in more to our adventure games, of like giving GMs those hooks, and GMs and players, right? Giving players rather the hooks to tell the GM, hey, this is a button you can press. Here's how it works. And then as you're saying, Josh, you can work it into kind of the sandbox or the module, where, okay, the lost lover, and do we care about that every episode? Maybe not, but like this episode, it really matters.
Right.
That, Michelle Rodriguez dated someone before she met Vin Diesel, and it's like, and suddenly that's the plot. Pardon the incredibly stupid analogy, but I love those movies. So I do think it's a cool example of the design you were talking about with Liminal Horror. You're bringing it into a game you really like, Orbital Blues. I mean, obviously you like both those games, but since you said you're the number one fan, so that's very cool. I look forward to reading Paramore and messing around with a lot of the output of Orbital Blues Month. We are right out about time, so I wanted to give both Chris And Josh, especially a chance if you guys have any last deep thoughts or questions. Chris, if you have any final questions, and Josh, if there's anything else you wanted to add before we do our plugs.
My deep.
Real quick
Oh,
to
go ahead.
interject.
Yeah,
I
go
just
for
want
it.
to talk about Project Team here because I think it's important to shout out. It's not just me doing
Nice.
Paramore.
Yes, for sure.
I knew I couldn't write this by myself because I didn't have the time for it. So I'd reached out to Chris Ario. Keep saying that wrong. Sorry, Chris. Um, who is a third-party mothership writer. Who does a bunch of really great stuff in his own right, and then he's been kind of helping me to put this together. He's doing a lot of like the setting details where I'm doing a lot of like the setup. And so it's a really, really good partnership there. We've got Sam Lee on as editor, who is a very good writer in their own right. And Lur Noise is our artist who has done some fucking incredible work. So we got a couple of preview images up, especially if you can follow the page, you'll see our cover. I'm really excited about kind of like this team that we've assembled here, and I think it's going to be something special.
Very nice. And the is the team name Vaulted Pyramid? Should we shout out Vaulted Pyramid specifically?
No. Vaulted Pyramid is my fake company.
I see. I gotcha. So, but
So
yeah, well, we should still
it,
shout it out, even if it's just
yeah,
you.
it's my design imprint technically, but I need to self-incorporate, and it's also a fictional company that exists in some of the stuff that I write because I think that's funny.
Yeah,
But
I love that.
uh, so Vaulted Pyramid will eventually be like a proper publishing imprint at some point. It's just I haven't launched that officially, so it's you'll see it marked all over the place. It's just not a real thing yet.
That sounds real to me, personally.
Well, very cool. We'd be happy to vault into your pyramid, or you can whatever, however that works. But yeah, it'd be cool to work together, Josh, sometime. Given you are very prolific and so good and adept at working across systems, I think we're basically out of time for this conversation. So we didn't get to talk about Dorian Gray. So we'll just have to have you back on for a spooky episode, maybe, and we can talk a little more, dive a
Oh,
little more into sort of horror and story games, maybe in the year ahead.
we should start
Um,
planning spooky season
we
now.
should, yeah. That's also shout out plus one experience. So big ups for publishing. Salutations, Mr. Gray is the name of the game, I should say. So when the
Yeah.
CIA transcribes this at taxpayer expense, they're like, "Ooh, I'm going to order that from Tony Vicendo."
Not enough people have bought this. Might be the best thing I've ever written. So
It's very good.
Well,
It's
there
very
you
short. It's
go.
very good. Standalone game, very cool. Very different take on like kind of a heist vibe, also, which I love. I think it's one of
yeah.
the best, if not the best, genre or of activity sort of structure for narratives and
Yeah,
TTRPGs.
subgenre.
Before we do just randomly hit the red button and end the stream, Josh, where can folks find you / Vaulted Pyramid to be incorporated and all the work by you and the teams you work with, because you are taking this kind of Paul Erdos approach and MF Doom approach of working with lots and lots of people. So shout out anywhere. I will plug in the URLs later, but if you want to say verbally out loud anything, handles, URLs.
We should have done a bit.ly or condensed version for the backer kit for Paramore, but I did not think that far ahead. So go look up Paramore backer kit, and hopefully you'll find it. That's the big one. we need followers.
It
Well,
pops
we'll
right up. It pops
definitely,
right up.
yeah, we'll definitely have links in the
Yeah.
description below. So yeah, please hit those links. Check out Paramore, and then yeah, where else can we find you, Josh?
So elsewhere, it's really just kind of like itch.io and Blue Sky are the kind of the big ones here. On both, I go by Unenthuser, which is unenthusiastic user smashed into one. Should be easy enough to find.
It just sounds like a
Uh,
Pixies song, honestly.
yeah. I'm still pretty active on Blue Sky. You'll find me there if you want to chat about stuff. But the more important one is like if you really want to talk, go to the Liminal Horror Discord server because I'm an admin there, so I'm running there and I'm on there every day. That's where you'll find me if you don't want to talk about Liminal Horror specifically. The easy way to find anything Liminal Horror, anything me related, is because that's my biggest thing, is liminalhorrorrpg.com. It'll take you right there. That's got all of our links to all the stuff there. Again, join the Discord server. You'll find us. Come talk about it. I float around other Discord servers, but not nearly with the frequency in which the one that I help run. So
Yeah.
that's the big one.
Well, very cool.
Very
Well,
good.
thank you so much, Josh, for hanging out. And folks can find, all those links in our episode notes. And if you want to get in touch with us or talk about the show, you can head on over to the Stillfleet Studio Discord server, which similarly is really the only Discord server I have a ton of time to participate in. But there's many
only
good
one I
Discord
care
servers.
about.
There's so many good ones in the OSR and NSR and whatever
It's true.
we're in now. So shout out to Josh. And Orbital Blues Month will be back with, let me check the date because I keep saying it wrong because one of them's a Sunday, not a Monday, and we usually do Mondays. But we will be back
Check your
on
homework.
Sunday, March 29th with Adam Good, our buddy at Stations, to talk about science fiction and many other topics, I'm sure. Usual time, 7 p.m. Eastern. And we will be back the very next night with Wes Franks from Plus One Experience and come on in to talk about F Infinity. So that's Monday, March 30th at 7 o'clock. So this is our rapid series on Orbital Blues and all the fun things you can do with that system and in that world. Thanks, Josh, for sharing your perspective. Learned a lot, and we'd love to have you back on. Everyone have a great night.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Here's wishing you an Orbital Blues Christmas. I had to get that in. I'm so sorry.
I'm clicking the button.